Good afternoon, YouTube. So, thank you those that are going to join me for this very important yet difficult conversation around self-harming, which is part of the wider discussion on my suicide prevention series, or a global goal to lower global suicide by 15% by 2030. So, this is a very, very complex area of sadly where people self-harm, and it happens in all different age groups. So I've looked at some evidence and I've combined it with my research, so hopefully I'll be able to give you some. I don't think I'll be able to give you some answers, but I'll be able to give you some pathways, which is my hope at the end of this short talk for about 10-15 minutes. So self-harm, well, how do we look at it? We know reality is sadly that lots of people do. um, Whether or not they always intend to want to end their life is unknown from the data. And it's, as stated before, suicide prevention, one of the complex areas that we face as a global community is the data around actual deaths upon uh, someone that's uh, made that choice to end their life. Not every country in the world has a national policy around suicide prevention, and that's why it's very, at the moment we stand. I mean, I think this is quite it. I think it's higher at 804,000 a year, approximately, from the World Health Organization choose to end their life, which is about one person every 40 seconds. I think that trajectory is going up for sure because of poor mental well-being, generally in society, where we don't get taught how to manage our emotions in schools from an early age. Anyway, so that's the reality. Self-harm is real. People do choose to self-harm, and there are lots of different ways we can look at this. But I want to focus more on the behaviour slightly first. So whilst I can't sit here and give you all the reasons, some of the reasons, I'll give you some stories. I'll give you a social media story first, and I'll give you my story. So we know, reference point, Instagram and sadly TikTok, that a couple of years ago, I think it was, I think BBC done a documentary on this. It became a fad of self-harming, sadly, and that's very worrying. The problem we have as mental health professionals, psychologists, is that if a 13-year-old watches something negative on TV or on Instagram or TikTok, as it were, it trains the brain in one way to make that acceptance, okay, that it's okay to do that. At 13, a child is still developing their emotional intelligence, and there are lots of other different body things are going on. So we get extremely worried and concerned. Interventions are not always accessible, and in all honesty, the research around this is quite vast. You can't. It's impossible to predict sometimes who may want to end their life or self harm. They do correlate to each other, but it's hard to tie in both of them in terms of who's at risk. And even if you have all the services at max, we all have our problems. So it's very difficult to try to not conceptualize all of this in terms of suicide prevention, but also targeting the right services where it's needed, and what are the growing trends, and why are more age groups or people in certain countries choosing to self-harm or sadly take their own life. And I think the answer to that is different pathways I can shed some light on in terms of my own research and stuff that's already out there at the moment. So we know one thing: there are gaps in knowledge, in terms of it's very hard to risk assess everybody that might self harm. And the reason is the brain is complex. Okay, we're all capable of doing not good things. All right, it's very quick. Reference point, a process or a phenomenon called hijacking. Okay, which is really associated with sadly with serial killers, that where one part of the brain takes over, and that's when you have an anger moment. Okay, it can happen to any of us, and people that sadly, it is true, that have been abused. I was fortunate in my abuse. I've worked through that, but there is a relationship between serial killers and abuse and what they do in their later lives. Now, it can also happen in self harming in terms of someone that's been abused and wants to self harm. But there's a whole list of reasons for that. So we need to focus more, I would say, on adjusting the mindset. With interventions, it's very important that we kind of increase that up as best we can for the right age groups. For adults, especially men, and anybody really, it's your emotional intelligence, servant leadership, self reflection, self forgiveness, and self compassion that's really going to be the key to managing your stress and anxiety, and also trying to identify ways where you don't feel like a weak person. Okay. So when I say a weak person, I mean that there are so many different angles you can look at it. Self punishment is kind of a trigger. I mean, if you speak to a psychologist, they might give you different terms, but we all go through self doubt, sadly, and we're not very good at forgiving ourselves, okay, and having more self compassion for our own being, the mistakes that we make. And there is a relationship to safeguard people away from self harming with self forgiveness. So that's a really important EQ skill. And it's a lifetime skill because we have to go through these experiences sometimes. As the saying goes, we learn through failure. But the problem we have is that when something becomes a fad or a trend on social media, for instance, it triggers off something that's very negative in a young child's mind or even in an adult's mind, more particularly in children because their brains are still growing. So it's worrying, but there is a safeguard system. Looking at for instance, the UK National Suicide Prevention is, and I think it's very outdated. I'm still looking at a lot of reports. Interventions will only work as much as there is access to it, and you can never provide enough access to mental health services on a national or global scale because there just is not enough resources. So what I'm trying to champion in my research is giving and teaching people the ability to manage their own uh, or understand their thoughts, feelings, and behaviours, their emotional intelligence, which doesn't get taught in schools. And we know, reference point, that as I stated before, with global suicide levels, because the trajectory is going up, where we're going to see that fall back in depression, stress, and anxiety. It's all connected. So, in short, are we all harsh on ourselves more so in this era? Yes. And there are loads of different reasons why, because we live in different communities. It could be poverty, so many trigger points in terms of somebody wanting to self harm. And until we get more of a universal education system around knowing where your thoughts come from, why you feel that way, promoting self check ins, eating, sleeping well, these are all contributors to living a more fruitful and happier life. But stress is real. And I think that the way the media and other organisations perceive stress and anxiety, even some of the mental health professionals themselves, when they write an article, there was one the other day, and I can't remember the organisation, talking about child trauma. I've been through child trauma, and it was saying about bullying. At the end of the day, it doesn't. There's so many different variables, as psychologists say. You can't always predict what somebody might do, or not in just in terms of being a victim, but somebody that might want to cause harm to others. Okay, so we live in a world, sadly, where self harm is one way where we feel we can maybe get some relief. And I've got to look at more research on this, but I know that self harm wasn't part of my childhood because although I was abused, it was very difficult for me growing up in my later years to accept it wasn't my fault. And I do understand being a victim where that can trigger off wanting to self harm. Some people call it, they categorize it as a call for attention. It could be. Every case is different, but it is about prevention and recognizing that we need to have these conversations even in schools, particularly so because it needs to be on the curriculum about uh, not just suicide prevention, but better mental well-being, and teaching our students to be a lot more empathetic towards their own feelings, which comes across as self forgiveness and self compassion, which, according to academics, are quite positive to throw back a lot of self harm thoughts. So, suicide thoughts and self harm thoughts, they are and they're not correlated because they're very different sides of research. But what I'm learning so far at the very quick early stages is that it is about more leaning how you're feeling and trying to rationalize those thoughts, which is what you get taught when you go to counseling in terms of working with patients, and not to be too harsh on yourself. But there is an issue with social media in terms of the negative content we watch. So we have to teach our children and ourselves to be mindful and careful what content we put up here, because you might have often heard of the conversation around don't watch too many horror films. And the reason is it is known, and the science is pretty clear on this. It can trigger off different thoughts, dark thoughts even, which may trigger off self-harming or even suicidal thoughts. Now, I'm not saying that all horror films will do this, but we do as humans need to be careful of the content that we watch. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it, sadly, because um, I haven't got loads of data just yet on and loads of research on self harming because I'm still quite new in this area. But I know that my own research is going to push back against that in terms of teaching teenagers and adults how to manage their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, living in the moment, being thankful, waking up, meditating, eating well, sleeping well, which is what doctors and psychiatrists and lots of professionals have been teaching us for years. But the main thing is to be real with your emotions, and certainly stress and anxiety are not dirty words. They're real words. We can use them, and even self harming is not a dirty word. It's not something to be afraid of in an open conversation, even at work, because the more we relax the conversation, certainly from the pandemic, as the old phrase goes, it's okay not to be okay. Self-harming thoughts are they worry a lot of people, and so they should. So, but we need to get these conversations more conversely into our everyday lives. And I'm not saying you don't want to. We have to be careful, of course, because even I was pretty nervous doing this talk because sometimes somebody might watch a talk like this and it might trigger something. I can't safeguard that 150% because I don't own someone's brain. I can't, the best I can do is offer my research and wisdom and say from my own childhood to say, look, there is definitely hope for you. If you're somebody going through something right now, seek help, number one, the best way you can. Know that you are loved and you are important in this world. Don't feel ashamed of what you've done or something that might happen to you, because we live in a dark world. Sadly, it's not a perfect world. And the more love and empathy we have towards each other, the better our research and certainly resource allocation will be. And certainly towards your own personal development is understanding that you don't need to feel alone, although in difficult situations, domestic violence, self harming particularly, and other areas. Loneliness is it's real and it can trigger so many other different thoughts. So we need to get better at these conversations, having them out there, and having more education around it. Um, from what I can see, there is some suicide prevention courses. Self harming, I don't know whether there's a first aid badge yet in the UK. I'm hoping there is, but making accessible resources free and just sharing ideas around different areas of suicide prevention, and the general idea is to not just focus on suicide prevention, but also on your how do we manage our emotions? Are we good at it? The data is telling we're getting worse and worse because depression, anxiety, stress globally, from different measurements I'm looking at, is going up. It's not going down. All right. And those levels are getting worryingly high. So that's my thesis is to use my research and work with collaborators and companies that want to. Not everyone wants to work together. I understand that to lower global suicide rates because it's all connected. Right? When someone sadly makes that choice that they want to end their life and they go through with it, and it's usually the second time, according to data from the World Health Organization, that's a sad reality. Sad, and it saddens my heart. Not just because I'm a born again Christian or anything like that. It's because I'm a human and I care about people. And we live in a dark world. You've got war in Ukraine. There's so much pain and suffering at the moment, and there always has been. But lately, speaking to friends, and it's I don't support certain things. Obviously, being a born again Christian, but the pain and hate that we have towards each other and our own selves, more important than that, we need to have more, as I've written here, self forgiveness and self compassion. And I will try to do some more talks around those subjects. And in the future, I've just made a course on emotions in the workplace, which isn't live yet, but I'll promote that as best I can. The feeling of, wanting to self harm because we're alone, or whatever emotion that person's going through, is an awful thing. Not because it's completely wrong, it's because it feels like that particular human has got no way out. And all the research and the knowledge and the lived experience that I have, if I could install that to every human on this planet, I'd think that they'd throw back a lot of self harm and suicide thoughts, because having been abused myself and almost nearly, not, I did contemplate ending my life, but the self harming is a real danger. But we need to talk about it. So I don't want to say I hope you've enjoyed these conversations. I think that wouldn't be quite appropriate. But these are difficult talks that I'm doing sometimes, and I'm not perfect myself. And I want to thank those that are praising me at the moment. I'm working on my own. I don't have any real support per se. I've reached out to people to connect with them. I'm doing this, it feels like not on my own, but I have a very humble brand. It's not even registered yet, but I am just a humble thought leader, and all I'm trying to do is share my research and work with others to put some goodness in the world in terms of mental well-being and lower global suicide levels. That's the target by 2030. So if you do want to work with me and you want to have a basic conversation about what I'm doing in the project, which is nothing special at the moment, I'm just doing these live talks and putting out the series because I know that a lot of people follow my work here on LinkedIn, and people do listen to me according to data. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and the data is telling me once I've got viral marketing again, hopefully soon, I can create some real impact on global on some of the world's biggest problems, including lowering global suicide, which is, I don't want to call it a problem, but it's reality. It's sad. It's a sad reality. That's what it is. But anyway, I'll leave you folks, and I'll smile, and I'll bid you a very good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock here. Yep, just gone 12:07 here in the UK. Bit early for you Americans out there watching this, but anyway, thanks to those again who have supported this project in its early phase and the work that I'm doing. And yeah, I bid you a good day. Have a blessed day. Stay well. Be positive and look after this. Relax, don't work too hard. Okay? Bye for now. Thank you.